for our other friends. Hi, Joel. Hi, Jessica. Welcome. So this week's Parsha is Vayishlach. Put it here in the chat if you need the text. Genesis 32:4 to 36:43. So here's the summary. The bulk of the story of the Parsha is about Jacob preparing to reunite with Esau. He's still kind of afraid that Esau's going to kill him, so he prepares extensively ahead of time for this reuniting. The night before they reunite, Jacob wrestles. We understand it to mean that Jacob wrestled with an angel. The text doesn't use the word angel, and the whole situation's kind of terse and bizarre, but we can talk about that more. But then Jacob and Esau do reunite. They are very friendly and conciliatory to one another. They cry, they hug, they kiss. Everything's good. They introduce their families to one another, and then they go their separate ways, and we never see them interact again, because sometimes that's the best way to maintain healthy relationships with difficult family members. So then Jacob's family continues on. They settle toward near Shechem, the city of Shechem, which is also strangely the name of the prince of the city. And there's an incident that happens with Shechem and Dinah that has been a source of some debate and confusion. But she somehow he violates her, and then in return, her brothers and I guess sort of father, Jacob's kind of passive in the whole episode, but he is a spokesperson for the family. They demand that then, so Shechem and his whole household, and indeed all the men of the city, must be circumcised to be deserving of an Israelite woman. And then while they are all rehabilitating from that procedure, the same brothers go and slaughter the entire city. And so then the family has to move on again, because now there's not such great relations with the neighbors. And on the way, Rachel dies giving birth to Benjamin, which is not the name she gives him. She gives him a different name, and then Jacob immediately renames him, and then buries Rachel on the side of the road, and it's very tragic. And then at the end of the Parsha, Isaac dies. So a lot happens in this section, actually. A lot of it is very terse. I mean, like a lot of the Torah in general, I guess. But so there's a lot of room for midrash, for discussion, for commentary. There's the, everything that happens between Jacob and Esau. There's the deal with the angels. There's the deal with Dinah. There's Reuben and Bilhah's affair. There's and there's the thing with Rachel, which then becomes important in her sort of spiritual role to the people of Israel as well, as we see it comes back around in Jeremiah, that she's like, her soul is like stuck there on the side of the road. And so she becomes the matriarch of the exiles. So that's the gist. Any of those sections speak to anyone in particular? Where would you like to dive in first?
Hi. I guess
Hi.
I can get us started.
Great.
So, the whole story with Jacob wrestling with an angel. I'm just kind of curious, like what the original text says, what the original language is, because the Christian interpretation of that is that this angel is really Jesus. So Jacob is wrestling with Jesus. And in the end, like the Christian theology, where the verse says, you have wrestled with God and with man. So like the interpretation is that, okay, this was Christ that he was wrestling with. So I just want to hear like what is like the original language or the original intent of that story.
Well, we definitely don't read Jesus in. That's generally not our thing. So the text says man. Excuse me. Got something stuck in my throat. Um, so Jacob was left alone and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. It never says angel. It never describes him appearing or why they're wrestling. It just suddenly it's happening. And then there's a lot of, the Hebrew language itself is also very terse. The pronouns are built into the words themselves. So there's a little bit that's confusing here in the next sentence. He saw that he had not prevailed against him, whatever. So I think that's the angel saw that he was not winning this wrestling match, and he wrenched at Jacob's hip in its socket so that the socket of his hip was straightened as he wrestled him. But again, Jacob's still winning this fight. So the man says, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." And he said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me, or until you bless me," really. And so the angel or the man asks, "What is your name?" And Jacob tells him and says, "Well, you will no longer be Jacob, you will be Israel, for you have wrestled with," let's see, the translation says beings, divine and human. The Hebrew says, "You have wrestled with God and man." Yeah, okay, and you have prevailed. And the word Israel is translated generally as God wrestlers, one who wrestles with God. And then Jacob asks the man's name, and the man won't tell him, and he flees. Which I just read a commentary recently that says, okay, so the translation says, "Pray tell me your name," but he said, "You must not ask my name." But actually the language, the Hebrew says, "Why would you ask me my name?" Why would you ask me my name? And he blessed him there. So that's interesting. And then Jacob names the place Peniel, that I have seen a divine being's face. So that's where we understand it all to mean that the man is an angel, because why does he appear out of nowhere? Why does Jacob think he has the power to bless him? Why does Jacob say this is a divine being? Why does it merit the name Israel, God wrestlers? I think the understanding of when it says you have wrestled with or struggled with humans and God, he has already struggled with his brother. He's already struggled with Laban. He's struggled with humans, and now he's struggling with the angel. It's not to communicate that the person he's struggling with in that moment is somehow both divine and human. Yeah, Joel.
for interpretation, I will posit that every single one of us is of two minds. I have my logic mind, and I also have an emotional sense. And all of us are constantly struggling. Now, whenever I read anything in Torah, I know there's a lot of metaphor. We call that mashal. So I shouldn't really take things literally, but I can really say Jacob may have been wrestling with his emotional self, with the part of him that's constantly doing battle. Like, I know what I'm supposed to do, but once in a while, far too often, I get off the track. So how can I support that? First of all, we have the little event, and then we see that his Gid HaNasheh, his hip bone, his sciatic nerve was injured. So a few years back, I wanted to see, well, how does the sciatic nerve fill in with this? And I started to see that the sciatic nerve is the nerve that runs throughout the vertebra and really innervates sexual organs. It has to do with a lot of things that we ourselves need to control before we can rise above things. And I can really read that into the Parsha. Now, as far as bringing in other things, Jessica, what I personally like to do is this. Of course, I can go back into the Hebrew, and I'm searching in the Hebrew, where is the very, very deep connection going back at least 10,000 years? 10,000 years. 12,600 years ago was the flood. And I can read things in there as to the words and the names. It's, by the way, 12,600 years ago was the maximum. That's when the flood started to recede. That's when the glaciers receded and the level of the seas rose a great deal throughout the Middle East. So I want to look back and I want to see in the Hebrew, because even though we didn't have writing back then, we only have writing 5,100 years, still people would have told these stories to one another. So what are the Hebrew words they're using? And I'm struck all the time that the words fit perfectly. There's just so much truth in it. So anyway, that's my take on wrestling with, it says Elohim. By the way, Elohim, if you look throughout the Torah, Elohim really means powerful one. For example, right now, I could call Donald Trump Elohim. He's still in charge of the country.
I don't think that would be good for his ego.
Or even the mayor of your city, Elohim. He's the guy who, and if you read that Elohim as meaning the powerful one or ones, because it's plural, it just fits so perfectly.
Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Go ahead with yours. I had something different occurred to me about Jacob. So go ahead.
Okay. So just last thing on what Joel just said, though, to your point about Jacob really wrestling with himself, that's something Aviva Zornberg points out in her chapter on this parsha, that it's really all of the misery that happens at the end of the parsha with his daughter and his wives and all of that is really his own fault because of the way that he's constantly struggling with himself. Like when they left Laban's, they should have gone straight to Hebron, back to his family's holding. Why did they do all this wandering? Why did they settle in Shechem? Why did he wrestle with this angel? Why did he separate the camps? And we know why, like from the text, but it's because of his own like internal struggle instead of just doing the thing, you know? And so then by having these extra wanderings and everything, that's why we end up, you know, why Rachel has to die at the side of the road. We don't know if the midwives in Hebron would have been able to save her life, but at least then she could have been buried in the cave of the matriarchs and patriarchs, you know, everybody else. so this kind of stuff is just, it's all about his own, whatever his internal struggle is, it gets in his own way.
I struggle, speaking of struggles, with the Torah study, the interpretation, who wrote what does it mean? I particularly value the literal translation that we do a lot of with the actual word. And I was particularly struck with Aviva Zornberg because with my background, I mean, she fit her interpretations based on psychodynamic Freudian principles. It all made sense to me. So Jessica, in some ways I'm talking about my own struggles, but also saying to you, I feel like there's the literal translation, and then there's the interpretation that we all make based on our internal views and issues. Does that sound reasonable, Rabbi?
Yes. And I think that's what the rabbis did, the ancient rabbis did. That's what so much of the Talmud is, so much of the Midrash, the Parshanut of the Middle Ages, Rashi and those guys of the, middle. It's so much of that's about trying to read the literal text, and then also look at it through their own lens and say, like, what does this mean for us? And so each generation has the benefit of the generations that came before, that we can see what it meant for the Jews of 500 in Babylonia, and what it meant for the Jews of the Rhineland in 1100, and what it meant for the Jews of Warsaw in 1940, and then what does it mean for us today? So yes, and Zornberg does that so brilliantly with her.
She does. Oh my God.
She has, between her degrees in psychology and English literature, and then her Orthodox background, how she can just weave the Midrash and diagnose the biblical characters and bring a comparison of it. It's just so,
I was truly
enthralling.
Yes, that's a perfect word, enthralling.
Dave, go ahead.
I had a slightly different take on Jacob. When I was reading this and trying to make sense of it and saying, well, it's not an angel, it says Ish, a man, and everything was, certainly in the two translations I had, because my Hebrew is not very good, the he and he and he and he and him. And I thought, what this really is reminiscent of is a dream. And I was thinking of his dream before Jacob's ladder back in a few chapters earlier. And I thought, all right, here he is all alone. The next day, he's got to go and meet his brother, whom he is afraid is going to kill him. He is so afraid that he has sent messengers with gifts ahead, and not even just send them ahead, but send them in staggered in groups. And each one has to give the same message of submission, which I have an issue already with. And there he is all alone and really scared. But at the same time, it's been 20 years and he's 20 years older, and he's amassed a fair amount of goods. He's done pretty well for himself. And it's almost like this struggle is a dream struggle. And while it's unlikely that he'd wrench his hip in a dream struggle, nevertheless, people do thrash around. Certainly anybody who's ever dealt with vets who have post-traumatic stress syndrome. Some of them have had to be physically restrained because of their violence. So I was thinking, here's this guy all alone, very frightened, and what he's wrestling with are his own demons, his own fears. And that's why it's just a man. Nobody else sees this. Nobody else knows anything about this. But in the morning, he's no longer Jacob, he's Israel, a guy who has combated his own demons as well as the face of God, which I'm not sure we're meant to take that literally, because he also applies it to Esau. He says, seeing you is like seeing the face of God. And I'm thinking, really? I don't think so. And I thought, well, maybe it's just hyperbole. Maybe that was just standard greeting. Oh, to see you is like gazing upon the face of God. Maybe, maybe not. So that's anyway. That was my little take on my little fantasy.
Well,
yeah.
Go ahead, Rabbi.
No, I was just going to say I like it. So go on.
I
Terry.
like it too. I was just going to add that is very much in line with the work that dreams do for us, or the things that we work out through our dreams. So that sounds spot on. I like it.
Thank you. That's what occurred to me.
And yeah, go ahead.
Are we going to jump to the incident with Dinah?
Yes, I want to say one other thing about your point about Jacob first, and then we can do that.
Okay.
So I was reading something sort of wooey, but their interpretation of this parsha, or of that section anyway, they draw the comparison to Moses in the cleft of the rock, that Jacob says, tell me your name, and the angel says, why should I tell you my name? How can you ask me that? He's indignant, kind of like that this is private information. But then Jacob names that encounter as like having seen the face of God. And then on the other hand, Moses has these very intimate conversations with God. I guess we don't know that he knows God's ineffable name or whatever, but like he has this pretty intimate intellectual relationship with God, but he's not allowed to see God's face. And so there's kind of like an inverse parallel thing happening there, which I thought was an interesting point that I had never drawn that line before. And just it sort of names that no matter how well we think we know ourselves, God, the universe, whatever, there's always going to be a hidden piece and a piece that we can grasp. And it's always going to be like a bit of a struggle to accept what we cannot know and to keep searching for more information, or to appreciate what we can know, or whatever.
Or search for what's hidden.
Yeah.
That we aren't aware of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dina, what did you want to say about that?
Well, kind of jumping to the end, it was the response of the brothers was just, if you'll pardon the phrase, overkill. I mean, there's no question that Shechem and Hamor owe something in compensation to Jacob's family and to Dinah. And I understand that a standard thing would be, okay, you had intercourse with her, whether willingly or not, you're now obligated to marry her. And you're not permitted to divorce her. So it's not like, oh yeah, I'll take a wife. Okay, well, I've had enough. Bye. No, that's for life. That one you don't get out of. So I thought, okay, that would be a reasonable thing to do. And the two guys, Hamor says, name your price. Instead of Jacob providing a dowry for Dinah, it's the other way around. He says,
Mhm.
I'm not only do I want your wife, but I'm willing to pay whatever price you name. Well, the price, of course, is circumcision, but it's Jacob and the brothers lied to them and said, yes, you circumcise yourselves. We will be friends. We will work together. We'll share what we've got. And then they go and murder them all.
I'm
And
not entirely sure that Jacob is in on that plan.
all right, I'll back.
I do think that the brothers have that when they ask for the price of circumcision, they are planning ahead of what they're going to do with the vulnerable population. I don't think Jacob's in on it.
No,
He feels very passive in that episode.
And he gets angry at the two of the brothers,
Levi and Simon.
yes, later. And in fact, I looked ahead, I cheated and jumped to 49 to see what is he going to do when it comes blessing time. And boy, does he put it to those two guys as well as the eldest, Reuben, because Reuben presumably slept with his concubine, not a good guy. So anyway, but I did have a problem with the killing, if you prefer, the entire population there, men, women, and children, or at least all the men, and taking the women and taking all the goods, looting.
Yeah.
I had a problem with that.
So Dave.
Yeah.
You had, and I cannot remember, but there was another portion where there was violence, and you had also said you really have a hard time with that. And I feel the same way. And so it comes to me, my struggle with why do you have a hard time with it? What bothers you about it? That would be my question for you.
Oh, good question. I think because of two things. Number one, it just seems to me grossly unfair, particularly when there are established means that are nonviolent. And the other would relate to my own fears, my own worry about being physically attacked, particularly now that I am pretty old in terms of body. My mind doesn't feel as old, though I notice I'm nowhere sharp as I used to be. Solving problems just takes forever. But I physically, even with MS, 10 years ago, I could have defended myself against anybody attacking me. I felt, because I've been trained in martial arts, but I now could not defend myself. I would have difficulty even lifting my right arm unaided in certain directions. So I think it's a lot of it is fear for myself that I'm no longer able to protect myself, let alone my family or anybody else.
And that is such a basic, fundamental need for us. And I really do thank you for your very personal response, Dave. And I asked you because sometimes in the Torah study and the events that happen, the brutality, it just doesn't seem right to me. I have a very hard time struggling with why, what's the purpose?
Well, sometimes I can come up with a rationale, such as, okay, well, these were people who were idol worshipers, and so there was kind of a commandment that you shall not allow idol worshipers to live, you shall not marry them. But this wasn't really the case. I mean, the guys circumcised themselves. They said, okay, we're going to accept your God by doing so. I mean, if that's what it takes to marry in, yes, we will. We are not committed to our gods at all. And I didn't see them as being a threat. Where I saw Jacob actually being clever by refusing Esau's offers to guide him or to leave men with him. And he came up with this excuse and that excuse, you know, the cattle can't take the pace and the children can't take the pace or whatever. But it was very clever. It was well done, well managed. And I looked at this and I thought, why would you wantonly go and kill all these people so that then you've got to hit the road to prevent other people saying, whoa, we better get after these guys before they attack us. Just seemed unprovoked and un-Jewish to me.
Yes, un-mitzvah-like.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it wasn't like God said, okay, these are the was it the Amalekites or the Amorites? He said, don't allow them to live. Joel, you
the Amalekites are the ones that are,
you know,
remember to forget them.
That came from God. This didn't come from God. That at least that I'm
right. And also, like, a lot of that stuff, a lot of the massacres, which there's a few that happen in Shechem specifically, but a lot of the ones that happen later with, you know, toward the end of Moses' life, or especially in the book of Joshua as they're conquering the land, you know, most historians think like the numbers are greatly exaggerated. You know, that was normal for that time in an act of war to like chalk up how powerful your military was, is that you over exaggerate your death count and whatever. This is not an act of war, really. I mean, they do take all of the loot, I guess, but they don't try to conquer that land. There's no, like you said, there's no threat. There's no reason, there's no reason to kill the whole city, and there's not really even any reason to claim that you killed the whole city if you didn't. So it is very troubling from that point of view. The closest I can come, I think, to defending it is that they, you know, there's this idea of like, this thing is not done in Israel. Our people do not behave this way. And one of the things that this way refers to is sex without the father's approval, you know, sex outside of marriage. Whether or not it was by force to Dinah is actually not relevant in this social context because she doesn't have the autonomy to consent. Her father has to agree for her to lose her maidenhead. So, you know, that's something we see in this parsha in when Tamar is raped by her half brother in Kings. No, Samuel. Whatever. Later, when Tamar is killed by her, or sorry, raped by her half brother. This idea of like, this thing is not done in Israel. It's not done by our people. So I think like, because this great insult has been done not just to their sisters' like personhood, but to their cultural norms, now Shechem is not protected by any societal norms. It's like how, you know, Kosovo, like it was hard to protect the, you know, the Albanian Kosovars rights because Kosovo it wasn't an independent nation. I'm unclear on their status. They've declared independence so many times and Serbia refuses to acknowledge it that I don't know if the UN has acknowledged it yet, but like that was an ongoing thing. If they don't have a seat at the UN, it's like hard for them to be protected by the UN or to be responsible when the KLA, does terrorism. It goes both ways there. So I think like that's sort of what's happening with Hamor and Shrem. That doesn't really excuse all of the wanton murder of all the innocents, but like their town is now no longer protected by social norms because they broke the social norm first.
Okay. And the brothers do say, what does that say about us if we don't do anything? We say
Right.
our sister's a whore. So yeah, I can see that. Okay, thanks.
Does anyone have any thoughts about Dina personally? Something I think about kind of a lot.
What are
She's
your
so
thoughts?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have an opinion on whether or not she consented because it's clear that the text doesn't care. But it is something I just wonder about a lot, and I've read a lot on both sides. Of course, The Red Tent was a very good novel that presumes she did consent. She loved Shem. It kind of explains where she disappears to after the massacre. There's also several essays. That's the only arguments for her consent or for reading consent in this story that I liked. And it's a novel, so it doesn't even really make a literary argument. I've read a couple articles that do make a literary or like textual argument for it that I find very distasteful. That sort of play into like rape fantasies and things like that. It's not. So mostly, I guess, I assume she didn't, but I think it's also really important to understand the story through the context of that's actually not what her brothers are worried about.
I guess that's kind of like what's ruminating in my head is I just wonder, was this act because they were really truly concerned with her personhood? I think you mentioned that, just like really like I have to defend my sister, she just got violated in a terrible way. Or is it because it brought shame upon them as men and
Right.
not taking into account what she suffered, presumably.
Yeah.
And I think, like we've said so many times, the thing that we have to take into account when interpreting is the culture mores of the time that this was set in.
Right.
Joel, you're awfully quiet.
Yeah.
I just put something in the chat I wanted to call out to people.
Okay.
A lot of discussion about what you were just talking about. And it says, Shechem, son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the land, saw her. That's the first one. He took her. Lokach means took in the Hebrew. Lay with her is shachav, and humbled her. Now, because it's in that particular order, a lot of the rabbis, and there's sections in the Talmud also, they're saying, well, wait a minute, if it was strictly rape, the humble part would have come before laying with her. So it said, and by the way, the rabbis, of course, did call to Amnon and Tamor, where it was the reverse. You look at the Hebrew, it said what he did was he humbled her. I think the word is va'ana in the Hebrew.
Right, which is often, like in modern Hebrew, is translated as rape, but that the concept didn't exist in the biblical time. So our translators really struggle to get to what it really meant. And as Joel said, part of how they do that is that they look through the lens of, of the Targum, of the rabbis, of the other ways that it's been rendered. And it means humbled. It means debased, really. Like is it that because she was violated or because her honor was removed?
Well, what Rashi says, Rashi, by the way, one of our most prolific commentators, he just says a couple words. He said that the first one, lay with her, means he had intercourse with her naturally. And the second one, he humbled her, he had intercourse with her unnaturally. And that's all that he said. And but what we tend to do, what we love to do, we love to look back and to see what our sages have said. So Rashi was born in 1040, died 1105. He was born 980 years ago, and we're still debating this. And there's just so many great discussions. And what they would do next is they look at that word humbled and they say, well, wait a minute, here's another section of the Torah. Let's compare what it means here and what it means here. And
right.
So for Jessica, what we try to do, more so than bring my own thought into it, my 20th, 21st century mentality, I have to go back and say, at the time this book was written, these stories were told, like, what do they have in mind? What are they trying to teach us? It's not what I'm trying to teach them. I can't do it. The Christian theologians also do a great, great job with this. A lot of the theologians, of course, they're very fluent in Hebrew. They know the roots. And quite honestly, I think that they're doing just such a superb job, because this Torah is everybody's Torah. Everyone on the face of the planet. This is all of our Torah. It's not my Torah. It's not Rabbi Goldstein's. This belongs to what we call Kol Yoshvei Tevel, all the inhabitants of spaceship Earth. And we're trying to live by it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Radak says the same thing basically as Rashi, that the order of the words communicates that it was seduction or coercion more than violent rape. So I don't know, there's lots of continued writings on it. I wrote a paper in school, in rabbinical school, on comparing this and Tamar, and I think Judges 13 maybe I included as well. I don't have that folder still on this computer, but just sort of looking at the different ways that word is used throughout the Bible and what it could mean, and looking at all of the current, or I don't know about current, but contemporary, modern, textual analysis of it, particularly from feminist points of view. And there's still, the general takeaway is there's a lot of ambiguity in Dinah's story, as opposed to Tamar, where it's a lot clearer. And partly for the reason Joel says, that the order of the words, where Anah comes up, or Aneha, but also because Dinah is so silent, whereas Tamar says very clearly, multiple times, no. And so that's, that raises questions as well. And then Dinah disappears completely from the narrative. After it happens, we don't see how she feels. We don't know how she feels about her brothers avenging her. She's never mentioned again. As opposed to Tamar comes out of Amnon's room, tearing her hair out and eating ash and, ripping her clothes, and, like, her distress is very obvious. And, and we know she does kind of disappear from the narrative again, but like, we know it's stated specifically because Absalom, couldn't think of the other brother's name, Absalom takes her in and says, like, I'll protect you, I'll avenge you. And she goes and lives with him the rest of her days. So, like, we know what happens to Tamar, why we never hear from her again. We know she lives in seclusion with her brother, who avenges her, but also for his own political. I mean, he wanted to kill Amnon so that he could have the throne, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. So there's that. And yes, this he loved the damsel and spoke comfortingly to her. But that's said after the intercourse, whatever that entails, which I can't remember which who said what now. I don't think it was Phyllis Tribble. I think it was Tamar Eshkol or something of that sort. One of the modern female biblical scholars that's written on this, she writes about, again, doing sort of a Zornberg move where she brings in modern psychology, that most rapists, or like most men who commit acts of sexual
aggression,
yeah, would not admit that they have. Like, if you ask, they've done these studies of like men on college campuses, young men, 18 to 23. If you ask them, have you ever raped a woman? Of course, they would be horrified and say, of course not. If you ask them, have you ever had sex with a woman who was so drunk she couldn't stand or talk? Have you initiated sexual contact with a woman who is sleeping or possibly even passed out? And they'll say yes. It's important for the the internal psychology to believe that they haven't done the harm that they have done. So it is, again, there's a lot of ambiguity here. I have a hard time saying one way or the other where the situation between Dinah and Shechem really falls, but there's plenty of argument to say he did the thing first. And sure, I mean, maybe he didn't, maybe it was seduction. He didn't mean to physically hurt her, but he knew he was doing a thing that would cause her harm, humbling her in whatever way. And so then after the fact, he whispers these sweet nothings in his ear and tries to convince himself and herself that it was all good, that she really wanted it, that otherwise it's psychologically distressing for himself to fully face what he's potentially done.
They use defense mechanisms to protect themselves.
Right, like very subconscious ones. They're not fully even aware of.
No, it's not conscious. It's not a conscious decision.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Joel sent a thing in the chat. Joel, what's the Hebrew word that you included there?
Vatidbak.
Thank you.
Vatidbak. So
the same root as Dybbuk, the soul that is stuck to this world.
Right.
Cleaved.
Together. And I first noticed it in Genesis 2:24. It says, and a man shall leave his father and his mother, shall cleave unto his wife. Cleave. And just by coincidence, my translation said, for Dinah and Shechem, his soul did cleave. What that means is, we all know what that means. What it means is, it's not something as simple as being on the college campus. This is someone who really was his soulmate, etc. So
Right.
that gives me a better idea to understand what are they really saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, the Jewish people were such a small, tiny minority. People don't appreciate that. We're 0.025% of the world population. Now, around here, it seems they're 25% of the population. They're 2%, but they're all over. So there's Zuckerberg and this one and that one. Like you can't get away from them. And I'm reading about the Uyghurs up in the Soviet Union. I never heard of these guys. They have 10 million people. The Mormons, 10 million. Like, hey, how about us? And I think the point of this whole story is that we have such an important message that was kind of just dropped in our laps, that we have to maintain this, that we have to keep ourselves going as a people. You have 100 million. Okay, you can lose quite a few. It's okay. The Jewish people, believe me, we've lost so many. And I even within our tradition, we have people on the derech, people off the derech. Derech means path. And I always think of that when I'm reading things. I say, is this on the path, or is this heading towards up into the weeds? If I'm in the weeds, I better remember how to get back to the path.
Nicely put, Joel.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I try to remember, and I have my little notebooks, and so I can find my way back. I'm going way off in the wrong direction, but sometimes it's the right direction.
I like that.
So Joel, what do you do with the massacre at Shechem then? If the Prince Shechem and Dinah are soulmates.
I think the most important thing is that we must be aware of assimilation. Now, it's the same story in the United States. Now, I'm not sure what affiliation your temple is with, but in 1883, we had something called the Treifa Banquet.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. I think that was off the derech. Now, I wasn't around. If they would have asked me at the time, I might have said, gee, I don't know. I don't know about this. I think that we can't throw away our tradition quite so easily. And to the benefit, to the merit of the reform movement, they have just walked that whole thing back. And I remember when I was a young guy, the Reformed synagogues, the whole liturgy was very, very close to being Episcopalian or whatever it is.
Lutheran.
Unitarian.
Unitarians.
Very modeled on the German High Lutheran.
Yes.
Okay.
And they've walked that back to their merit.
Yeah.
And they're very appealing. And of course, sadly, they've stimulated Chabad. Like Chabad is really the most appealing. And you say, how can this be? These guys are running around with black hats and black coats, but they are as warm and friendly as the Reformed people. And I think we have to all aspire to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amen.
Thank you, Joel.
And you're welcome. But with Jessica, I think it's so important that we have to delve into scripture, and we're looking at mostly translations. And you can see even right here, I have one translation, and David has a different one. Terry has yet another one. There's more than 100, many more English translation. And here's what we say: every single translation, when you translate, you are a traitor. And it's known in the translation community. Oh, hey, can you please translate this letter into Spanish for me? And, they do their best. But among translators, it's well known. It's called traditori tradutore. It's an Italian phrase that means when you translate, you are being a traitor to the language.
Okay.
In Hebrew too. When we talk about Targum, Targum means a translation, an Aramaic translation of the Hebrew. And many times, or even Greek, like many times if I'm reading in the New Testament, I want to read the Septuagint. I want to read it in Greek. Now, that slows me down a lot because I can't read Greek. You know the letters, and I can pick my way through it, and I can say, well, wait a minute,
A
here's
lot more than I can do.
like we have Betula, meaning of, we have the word Alma, meaning not necessarily a virgin. That means a young woman of marriageable age, Alma. So I want to look in the Hebrew and see what is the exact word that's being used. I want to be true to what's written. And I know everyone else does too.
I mean, look at even English that we speak today.
Mhm.
I may have a different interpretation of a word than you, and the tone I use. So
Yeah.
it makes a lot of sense.
I had one experience around 30 years ago. I had a friend and we ran into a woman that I knew, and I was friendly with both of them. They had just met each other. And there was a little bit of chemistry there, and they were talking. And of course, I was standing there too. And I could see that whatever was being said was being misinterpreted by the other person. And it was just so interesting. And I said, oh, I hope they get to know each other better.
Did they?
In our time, the one of the more famous people is Harold Pinter, Pinter, playwright. It was his stock in trade. And just based on the misinterpretations, how words get in the way between us.
Mm.
And
Yep.
Hebrew too, we're not always the bad guys. Sometimes we're the good guys.
I'm really enjoying the animals
Yeah, me too.
joining our.
We have been joined by a female feline kibitzer
Feeling.
who is letting me know that it is time for me to feed her.
Oh.
She's being very, very quiet, very calm, and has not yet used her claws on me, which will come soon.
Right. Well, I guess you better go feed her.
I think you should get Badger.
I don't know where she is right now. I'm surprised she's not sitting with me. Bench.
Look at that cutie. I'm blessed that all mine are sleeping.
This is Khaleesi.
I love it.
Oh, look at her.
Khaleesi, the mother of dragons, if you watch Game of Thrones.
Yes.
She is a Bashan. She's a mutt. She's a Bashan Poodle Maltese mix.
Oh,
Yeah.
she's gorgeous.
Thank
She
you.
is.
She looks,
Thank you. She likes being on my lap, so that's why she's like constantly like just pawing at me, like, pick me up. What's your problem? Okay.
Woo.
Ooh. Ooh. Now we're tangled.
All right. Well, this has been lovely. We'll continue next week with Vayashev. And yeah, Joseph. So it's not all available in one video anymore, but you can still find a playlist of all of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat on YouTube. If you want to brush up on the upcoming Parshiot, you can do that. And remember, Sunday Adult Ed is moving to 3 p.m. And we'll be learning about mysticism.
Yeah. Excellent. Have a good week, everyone.
All right.
same.
So long.
Thank you all.